Nobody's looking. Nobody cares. You're not hurting anyone. That's a famous one. Yeah. To do these terrible things. Well, it's not hurting anybody, so why should you be bothered by that? You will be faced with this if you haven't already been. Even in your home, some of you, your job, your school, even in your church. There are some churches now that are telling people, shut up about these things and let's just get along. Let's just compromise. Let's just whatever. So I ask you, and please don't respond, but what will you do? What are you going to do when you are faced with this question? Because everybody in here at one time or another is going to be faced with compromise. Everybody. I don't care who you are. I don't care what kind of a job you have. I don't care if you're the dog catcher or the pastor or whatever. It doesn't make any difference. You're going to be faced with compromise. And then comes the question is, what are you going to do? And you know what is really important is what you do in private, not necessarily what you do in public. Because that's where real integrity comes from. Integrity is all important in the Christian life. What you do in private means even more than what you do in public. We're going to look at an account of 3 teenage boys. Teenage boys. You wouldn't think that there would be an account of 3 teenage boys doing anything good in the Bible, would it? I mean, let's be honest. I was a teenager once. I still insist that I am. I told somebody the other day I'm an 18-year-old trapped in a 55-year-old body. That is terrible conflict, I'm here to tell you. Terrible conflict. I hear some amens under the breath back here. All right, well, we're going to look at an account. These are 3 teenage boys. They were kidnapped from their home by Iraqis. Yep. Y'all didn't know Iraq was around back then. It was called Babylon. They were kidnapped. Here are Jews kidnapped from their home by Iraqis. Mad Magazine once said, you know you're in trouble when you're on a plane being hijacked to Egypt and your last name is Shapiro. These boys were in deep trouble. Not only were they kidnapped by the Babylonians, they were carried away to a distant land way away from their home. Teenage boys now. It's just getting worse. When they get there, they have no family. There is no family watching over them that they can call for. They can ask for help. They can ask for advice. No friends. They're all alone. Not only that, they had their identity stolen. Anybody ever had your identity stolen? Somebody stole my credit card one time and they wound up, after they looked at it, they put money in the account for me. And sent me a sympathy card. I remember one time while I was in church on a Sunday morning, somebody in California cleaned what little I had out of my BB&T account, and it took me a month to get it back, and I felt so violated that somebody was having fun on my $300 that I had to make it off of while I was in church. They stole it. I have no idea to this day how they got it. But they had their names taken away from them. Not just their identity. These boys had their names. They couldn't even be called their names anymore. Their original names were Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And the Babylonians gave them new names, which you know them more so by Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But that was not their original names. So they had everything taken away from them, everything stripped. Now, you know, it's easy to talk trash when everything's going your way, isn't it? It's easy to talk tough. It's easy to make a stand when there's no opposition and when nobody's breathing down your back, when you're not facing imminent danger, when everything is okay, you got your health, you got some groceries in the refrigerator, you can talk trash pretty easy then. But how about when this happens to you? What will you do? Now these boys, on top of all that, are facing compromise. Now what do you think that not just the average teenage boy, but the average anybody would do? When they've been taken away from home, they're hundreds of miles from home, they have no family, no friends, they don't even have their names anymore, and then they're asked to compromise. All the while the devil's whispering, it's no big deal, nobody's going to know, nobody's looking, it's not going to hurt anybody. What do you think the average person would do? Well, apparently when these boys were told by the devil that nobody is looking, they replied, God is. A whole lot of people think they can go do their meanness out of town. That it's okay as long as you're doing it out of town. Nobody's going to know. Well, God's out of town too, by the way. I don't know if anybody knew that. He watches you when you're out of town. And then probably they were told by the devil, no doubt, that nobody cares. And these boys said, oh yes, God cares if nobody else does. And I want to tell you this morning that no matter what's going on in your life, God cares and God sees. And after all, He is all that really matters in the scheme of things. Let's take a look and see what happened to him. Chapter 3. Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image or a statue of gold with the breadth 6 cubits, and he set it, and the height was 80 cubits. In other words, he set up a gold statue 90 feet high and 9 feet wide. That's a lot of gold. Yeah. That is a lot of gold. And he set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king sent to gather together the princes and governors and captains and judges and treasurers and counselors and sheriffs. Sound like they had the same kind of government back then that we do now. And it said and all the rulers of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image which Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. Now it repeats it over and over again. Rather than saying them, it tells who all came to this. So everybody that was anybody in the province of Babylon and the neighboring provinces all showed up, all the leaders, because the king had a big announcement. See, we use the internet now. We use television, satellite TV now. So this was their version of it. Bring every leader from every province in here and let them take the word back. So it says, then the princes, the governors, captains, judges, treasurers, counselors, sheriffs, and rulers of the provinces were gathered together unto the dedication of the image which Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up, and they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then a herald cried aloud, to you it is commanded, O people, nations, and languages. This was kind of like the leader of the known world at that time. They had conquered everything. Then this was the order. He said that at what time you hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, dulcimer, and all kinds of music, you fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. Nowadays, there would be no trouble getting that law passed. Yeah. Let's be honest. Sure. Most people would gladly go along with it as long as it was something in it for them. Most of the world would have no trouble doing it. And watch and see. He said, whosoever falleth not down and worship shall the same hour be cast into the middle of a burning fiery furnace. Now here, they're not telling you that if you fail to bow down to my image, I'm going to pick on you at your job, or I'm going to fire you, or I'm going to kick you out of school, or we're going to make fun of you on Facebook. What they're saying is if we catch you, we're going to throw you into a burning fiery furnace. It's different, folks. This is the time to think real hard what you're made of. Time to think real hard about who you're going to follow, because the day is coming, if the Lord tarries, that you might be faced with that, and so will I, with the real deal. You never know. You never know. I believe right now that most of this world's leadership would be glad to throw us into a furnace if they could. Now, therefore, at the time when all the people heard the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, all the kinds of music, the nations and the languages and all the people fell down and worshiped the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. Most of the world went along with it, no problem, because they'd already listened to the voice of the devil. He said, it's no big deal. You're just bowing down to a statue. Even if you believe in God, it's not a real God. It's not going to hurt anything. You're not going to bother anybody. Let's go along to get along. That's basically what the rest of the world heard, and they gave into it. Oh, but at that time, certain of the Chaldeans came near and accused the Jews. They were a sect of people in Babylon. They were very jealous. They were power hungry, and they hated the Jews. And these little handful of Jews didn't do it. They didn't bow down. And they spoke and they said to the king Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. Thou, O king, hast made a decree or a law that every man that shall hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and dulcimer, and all kinds of music shall fall down and worship the golden image. Now, they are playing to the king. The king is a big, spoiled brat that thinks he is number one. Oh, we don't ever have that problem in our government, do we? Boy, that's great we don't have that. This is the most egotistical king that lived in his day. He thought the world revolved around him, that he was the king of the universe and that there was no God that could even challenge him. That's how bad this man had gotten. And so the Chaldeans knew how to play to the king. And they go up and they butter him up and say, oh, king, live forever. And then they remind him, you made a decree that this is going to happen and that's going to happen. And then they said, and whosoever falleth not down and worship, that he should be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. Now they're going to lay it on him. There are certain Jews who you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not regarded thee. They serve not your gods, nor worship the golden image which you have set up. They knew exactly how to play to him. And then it said Nebuchadnezzar, in his rage and fury, the spoiled brat didn't get what he wanted. And so now he's mad that all the sheep didn't jump off the cliff when he clapped his hands. There were a few of them that said, no, we're not going to do it. And so now he's furious. And it said he commanded to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and they brought these men before the king. Now you need to bear in mind who they are. Teenage boys that are sold out to God. You get somebody sold out to God, and it won't matter whether they're a teenager or whether they're 75 or 85. It doesn't matter. They're not going to compromise. They're not going to give in. They're going to make their stand. And it said, Nebuchadnezzar spoke unto them and said, is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, do not you serve my gods nor worship the golden image which I have set up? Now he's trying to save face here in hopes that everybody will go along. And so he said, now if you be ready, at what time you hear the sound of all the kinds of music, you fall down and worship the image which I have made, well. But if you worship not, you shall be cast the same hour. You're not going to get an appeal. You're not going to get a lawyer. You're not going to get a stay. The very same hour that you say no, you're going to get thrown into a burning, fiery furnace. Again, the pressure is on. And then he made this statement, so arrogant, and he's about to get put into his place. And then he said this, and who is that God that shall deliver you out of my hands? Here this king had gotten to the point to where he thought he was as powerful as God, and that his word was the gospel truth no matter what, and that people had better go along with him. But here were three young men of God that said, no, we're not going to compromise. No matter what you do to us, we will not sell out God. Listen to what they said. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we're not careful to answer you in this matter. We're not afraid to answer you. We're not going to spend time picking our words to see if we can give you a politically correct answer. No, sir. They said, if it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if he won't, Be it known unto you, O king, that we will not serve your gods nor worship the golden image which you have set up. Now, the idea that we have here is that the king has a smirk on his face. He's got an arrogant, can anybody do the arrogant thing? That's kind of the way he's doing it. He's arrogant. He thinks, oh yeah, these boys are scared to death of me. I'll make them do it. I'll tell them, I'll threaten them. And they'll give in just like everybody else. And you know, the devil might be coming to you going, you are no different. You're just like everybody else. You're nothing special. You're going to give in just like everyone else will. And that's what he's telling you right now. And I'm telling you, don't you believe a word that the devil says in your ears, because everything he says is a lie. Everything he says is a lie. So, it said, then was Nebuchadnezzar full of fury, and I like the Old English, the form of his visage was changed against them. And what it was that smirk wiped off his face, and the color went out of it. He was in a rage. And it said that therefore he spoke and commanded that they should heat the furnace 7 times more than it was supposed to be heated. In other words, there was probably some red glowing metal in that thing. Maybe some white glowing metal. So hot that it would just burn them up in an instant. Now, not to be more, but they say that a crematory has to run at 1,500 degrees. And if it does that, it said that even bone and everything will completely burn up. And so that's what he was intended. He wanted just to burn them to where there was nothing left of them. 7 times hotter than it was. It said, then these men were bound in their coats, and the Old English says they're hosen. They weren't wearing hose, guys, okay? You're okay on that. They were wearing socks, okay? Hosen is socks in Old English, so don't panic. They were bound up in their coats, their socks, their hats, their other garments, and they were thrown into the middle of a burning fiery furnace. Now, therefore, because the king's commandment was urgent, and the furnace was exceedingly hot, the flame of the fire killed the men that throwed them in the furnace. It was so hot that the men that throwed them into the furnace was killed throwing them in there. Now, but they were so afraid of the king that they gave their lives up to throw those men in there, because probably what the king would have done had they refused would have been even more horrible than dying in the fiery furnace. That's how bad it was. It says, therefore, because the king's commandment was urgent and the furnace exceedingly hot, they died. Now, these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down bound into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. He had them tied up, matter of fact. They were tied hands and feet, and he put all of their clothes on them so that they would burn even more so. That's how hateful this man was and how arrogant this man was. Now, I was told by some archaeologists that took a look at what that furnace was like, and it was a large square box that had a set of steps going up that you could throw stuff in the furnace, and down at the bottom was a window and a place for that sorry low-down king to sit and watch people as they burned in the furnace. Let me tell you something. The devil would like to watch you burn today. There are people that would like to watch you burn today. There are people that just wish you would go away if you're not going to compromise and you're going to make a stand. And one of these days, again, if the Lord tarries, they're going to want to get rid of every single Christian off the face of this earth, because we are a thorn in the side of the devil. He hates us, and he hates the stand that we make. You are no friend of this world if you serve God. You are no friend of Satan's if you serve God. He wants to kill you. He wants to destroy you. He wants you gone, because you do his kingdom an awful lot of damage every time you open your mouth and every time you make a stand for God. Always remember that. And so they threw those boys in the furnace, and the king was sitting down there, and he had some of his counselors with him, and he thought he was going to watch some high-definition teenage boy burning. But look at what happened to him. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king was astonished, and he jumped up in haste And he spoke and he said to our counselors, and I want y'all to listen carefully to this, because some of y'all are in the furnace right now. Some of y'all are in the furnace in your home. Some of y'all are in the furnace at your job, at your school, wherever you may be, and you are walking through the middle of a furnace and the devil is just pouring it on. You got all kinds of stuff piling up on you, and so many things against you, and so many things attacking you, from your health to your emotions, to every other kind of thing going on in your life, and you just feel completely overwhelmed, and the devil wants you to give up. He wants you just to just go along with the rest of the crowd and just be quiet and forget about it, and it'll all be okay. No, first of all, it won't be okay. But that's what the devil wants you to do, because he's telling you this right here: you do it and you're going to be by yourself. You do it and you're going to be all alone when you make your stand. But I'm telling you again, that's another lie that the devil has to tell you this morning. Because here it is right here. The king said, "Didn't we throw 3 men bound in the midst of the fire?" And they answered and said unto him, "True, O king." And then he answered and said, "Lo, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they have no hurt, and the form of the 4th is like the Son of God." That don't give you chills. You need to come up here and get saved, I'm telling you. That is amazing. And here that rotten, low-down king was watching that, and he thought he was going to see a show, and he thought he'd hear screaming and hollering and carrying on. And there were 4 men walking around in the bottom of that furnace, still had all their clothes. They were walking around. They weren't tied up. The only thing that burned up were the ropes around their hands and their feet. And that's it, because that's what the devil put on them. And they were walking around loose, and said that 4th one that's walking around with them looks like the Son of God. Well, it was. Nebuchadnezzar came near the mouth of the burning fiery furnace. Now watch how he changes his tune. Boy, I tell you what, Nebuchadnezzar is such a good politician. He'd get elected by a landslide if he ran today. These politicians that we got today and people who run for office are just like a chameleon lizard. Yeah. Anybody ever seen a chameleon lizard? You put that chameleon on a piece of red cloth, the lizard will turn red. You put him on a piece of green cloth, he'll turn green. You put him on a piece of blue cloth, he turns blue. You put him on a plaid and he'll bust a gut trying to change color. That's just the way they are nowadays. And they'll change their tune along with whatever's going on and to please people and tickle their ears. And listen to what he said. Nebuchadnezzar came near to the mouth of the furnace and spoke and said, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, you servants of the Most High God." Yeah, just a few minutes ago he was saying, "And who is that God that can deliver you out of my hands?" What a phony. Play into whatever. And he says, "Come forth and come hither." Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came forth of the midst of the fire. They came walking out. Well, wait a minute, though. Didn't but 3 come out of there, didn't it? Didn't but 3 come out. Somebody stayed in there. The reason, and there's a song about this, and I know that, but I'm telling you, the reason that the 4th one didn't come out was there's some more getting ready to get thrown in there, and he's basically saying, "Next, bring them on. I'll walk with them." I'll walk with them, because he is there to walk with you. If you refuse to compromise, if you stand up for what is right, you've got somebody that's going to walk through there with you no matter what, and that is Jesus Christ. He will walk with you through that fire. Don't you be afraid to make your stand where you need to make your stand. I'm sick and tired of hearing these weak-kneed, spineless Christians whining all the time. A lot of times they whine at me, tell me, "Shut up. Quit saying those things. You're stirring up trouble. You're stirring up people. You're making people mad at you. Let's just love everybody." I said, "Come on over here, let me give you some loving then." Let me tell you something. God is love, and God loves you. But loving you and tolerating what you do are 2 different things. Don't ever mistake meekness for weakness. Don't ever do that. God loves you, And he loves you more than anybody else in the world, but he loves you too much to let you stay the way you are. And sometimes as a Christian, you've got to stand up, make a stand, and say what is right. If I wasn't able to say what is right, I couldn't preach anymore. Because the Bible says this is right, this is wrong. Make a stand, preach the word, tell it like it is. People, we need to start standing up on our hind legs for once and refuse to compromise with the world and say, no, I will not do that. Look what happened. These three men came out of the fire, and the princes and the governors and the captains and the king's counselors, all being gathered together, saw these men, upon whose bodies the fire had no power. You make a stand for God, and the devil will have no power against you. Please understand that. He will have no power against you. And it said, nor was a hair of their head singed. Has anybody ever had a hair on your head singed before? When I was 18 years old, I had hair down my back. And I was working in a laboratory one time. I probably told most of you this. And I had to have a cigarette. I'm not going to lie to you. I was 18. Back then, I had to have a cigarette really bad. And I found one, but I didn't have nothing to light it with. I looked out. Now I'm in a laboratory, smoking now in a laboratory. And I couldn't find nothing to light it with, and then I found a gas burner. So I took and turned the gas burner on and struck it in the back of the lab, and I leaned down with that and caught my hair, and it burned up. My hair burned up. Being a good smoker, I finished that cigarette after I put my hair out. But I had to go get my hair cut because it had burned all up there. And you talk about stinking. And the rest of the people came back in the lab, and there I was sitting there with my hair all burned up and about an inch of ash hanging on the end of that thing. I looked like Joe Dirt. And I thought, this ain't worth it. This ain't worth it. This is stupid. Why am I doing this? I burned my hair up for a 5-cent cigarette back then. Oh my gosh. But what I'm trying to tell you is it just takes a split second for your hair to catch on fire. These men were in a furnace that was hot enough to burn bones, and not even a hair of their head was singed. Neither was their coats changed or the smell of fire had passed on them. You can't even burn leaves outside without coming in smelling like you've been in a smokehouse. And they were thrown in the fire, and their clothes didn't even have any odor on it. What I'm trying to tell you is if you stand for God and you do what is right, you will get out of this world without even the smell of it on you. You won't even smell like the world. There are going to be some people standing before God that'll be reeking of it, boy, I'm telling you. And you're going to be mighty sorry. But it said that nothing had happened. There was no hair of their head singed. The fire had no power. And then Nebuchadnezzar spoke and said, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who hath sent his angel and delivered his servants that trusted in him, and have changed the king's word and yielded their body that they might not serve or worship any god except their own." As a result, it goes on that they were promoted, and they passed a new law that nobody could speak anything against their God. Well, everybody here has their own individual fiery furnace. Everybody's furnace is different, but it's still mighty hot, ain't it? The heat is on for you to stand up for Jesus. And it's not an easy thing to do, especially when you got this deal that the devil wants to cut with you over here. Oh, just tell one little lie and you'll get promoted. Look off of somebody else's paper and you'll pass. Just make fun of so-and-so with us and you'll get to hang out with the gang. If you cheat, if you lie, if you run around, nobody's really going to know, and it's not going to hurt. I'll tell you something, God knows. God's watching you no matter where you are. There's no door you can shut. There's no town you can go to where God is not watching you, and all He's asking is that you stand for Him and you do what is right. And I know once you do, I know the attack is on. I know I talk to a lot of people all during the week, and I have the same thing. The devil just throws everything he's got, including the kitchen sink, at you, but that's all right. Let him throw it. Let him holler, because you got Jesus standing right by your side, walking with you through whatever fire you may be going through. Take encouragement from that, because in the days ahead, the devil's going to try everything to make you just say, throw your hands up and say, what's the use? I can't keep on doing this. I can't keep this up. No, but God can help you do it. You can win this. You can make it no matter what your situation is if you don't compromise and you stand for the Word of God. You know, when it all comes down to it, the amount of money you got in the bank, I don't care how much or how little, isn't going to amount to a hill of beans. The car that you drive, the house that you live in, and the clothes that you have are not going to amount to a hill of beans, because the most precious thing you have while you're on this earth is your testimony. That's the most precious thing, because if you lose that, you have nothing. Keep your testimony. If you don't have one, get one. A testimony for God that He stood His ground, she stood her ground, and did not compromise. Shall we bow for prayer? I want you to think real hard this morning about what's going on in your life.